Vladimir Putin has indeed announced a new wave of mobilization in Russia, although he tried to disguise it as a legislative initiative. In particular, Vladimir Putin now personally has the right to call up reservists for military service not only in Russia but also abroad. This can be done in peacetime without declaring mobilization. And all this is under the pretext that someone needs to guard Russian oil refineries, which are increasingly being attacked by drones. But then why does the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation need to introduce an amendment stating that reservists can be called up in the event that the Russian armed forces participate in a war abroad? At the same time, Vladimir Putin has started to threaten more and more with nuclear weapons, the new miracle weapons of Russia, which Vladimir Putin promised to demonstrate. After the United States began considering Tomahawk transfers, an intercontinental Burevestnik missile with a nuclear engine ended up in Ukraine. At a meeting with Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov, Putin announced the completion of its decisive tests. Putin called the missile a unique weapon with unlimited range, which no one else in the world has. He also added that Russia has the most powerful nuclear forces in the world. And all this is happening against the backdrop of Trump refusing to meet with Putin and saying that he doesn't want to waste any more of his time on some bald Russian dictator. My name is Alexei Pechiy. Today is October 26th on the calendar. Let's discuss this topic together. It's very intense. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave any comment under this episode. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links provided. It says there, support Alexei Pechiy's channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you, whether it's a donation, sponsorship, or a paid subscription. I will be grateful for any support you give. So in Russia, they have figured out how to replenish the ranks of the armed forces of the Russian Federation without officially declaring mobilization, although these new changes to Russian laws should really be called mobilization. So what happened? The fact is that more than a week ago, the Russian government's Legislative Commission approved a proposal from the Russian Ministry of Defense, according to which citizens listed in the mobilization reserve can be called up to perform tasks even in peacetime, including outside the country. But interestingly, now Russians can actually be called up even without a formal declaration of mobilization. And this can be done by Putin alone, without any lawyer, approval from the State Duma, or anyone else. The draft law proposed by the Ministry of Defense in particular suggests amendments to the federal law on defense. According to the document, in the event of armed conflicts during counterterrorism operations, special military operations, and when the armed forces of the Russian Federation are used outside of Russia, reservists will be called up for special military training. The decision on this will be made by the President of the Russian Federation, and only he will be able to determine the procedure and, importantly, the duration of such training. The explanatory note clarifies that this concerns people who have signed a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense to be in the reserve. Currently, the law allows them to be called upon to perform tasks only during mobilization or wartime. Now, the law is being changed, and in principle, these reservists can be called up and sent to war at any time. And now the head of the State Duma Defense Committee, Andrei Kartopol, explains that first and foremost, reservists from Russia's border regions will be called up to fight. He also stated that during training, reservists can easily be sent, for example, to the Sumy or Kharkiv regions of Ukraine. Not to mention the occupied regions of Ukraine, which Putin has called Russian. Russians were told this step was needed because Ukraine is allegedly attacking Russian oil refineries and someone must protect them. Now, supposedly, the army is being brought in for this, and this army is supposed to be on the front lines. So, it's going to be a questionable rotation. Reservists are fighting in Russia, while the mobilized soldiers and contract servicemen are in Ukraine. But just in case, they still included in the law that Putin can send reservists abroad. Basically, you could call this mobilization, but under the guise of reservist training. But Putin himself, let me remind you, said back in September that there would be no mobilization. None is expected. Everything is going according to plan. Here, they've come up with a scheme to lure these reservists under the pretense of training and in reality send them to war. And at the same time, against the backdrop of Donald Trump refusing to meet with the president of the Russian Federation and the new United States sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil, Putin started rattling nuclear weapons. So the new wonder weapon of Russia, which Vladimir Putin promised to demonstrate after the United States considered transferring Tomahawks, turned out to be the intercontinental missile Burevestnik with a nuclear engine in Ukraine. At a meeting with Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov and other military officials, Putin announced the completion of its decisive tests. And then further, Putin called the Burevestnik missile a unique weapon of unlimited range, which no one else in the world has. In turn, Gerasimov specified that back on October 21, the Burevestnik covered 14,000 kilometers, staying in the air for about 15 hours. And that's not the limit. He says maybe it's truly unlimited? According to the general, the technical specifications allowed the missile to be launched with guaranteed accuracy at highly protected targets at any distance. Putin instructed to determine possible ways of using it and to start preparing the infrastructure for its deployment in the armed forces. Putin also stated that Russia's nuclear forces are at the highest level, and in this sense the country is ahead of all other states possessing such weapons. Let me also remind you that Putin first talked about the development of the Burevestnik in 2018 when he delivered his address to the Federal Assembly. And according to Western intelligence, from 2017 to 2019, they tried to launch the missile at least 13 times. And only 2 attempts were partially successful, while one ended in a major tragedy. In 2019, Burevestnik crashed into the Barents Sea, and during its recovery, an explosion occurred that killed 7 people, including scientists from the nuclear center in Sarov. The radioactive cloud resulting from the incident covered Severodvinsk and reached the Scandinavian countries. The last known test of Burevestnik took place in 2023. At that time, Putin also spoke of success, noting that work on the missile was almost finished. And here it's very important to note the full depth of Vladimir Putin's desperate state. The thing is, experts insist that there are doubts about the feasibility and that it's very important to be in distress. The thing is, this missile uses small reactors, and that's a poorly developed area. It's unknown how to control them in flight or what kind of radioactive trail they leave behind. Back in the summer of 2020, the United States Special Envoy for Arms Control, Marshall Billingsley, also spoke about the danger of the Burevestnik and called on Russia to stop testing this missile. And I'll quote him further. "This is nothing but a flying Chernobyl. After all, besides the nuclear warhead, the missile carries nuclear fuel on board, can leave a radioactive exhaust as it flies, and its crash could lead to contamination of the area. Let me remind you how, in 2022 and 2023, Putin claimed Ukraine was preparing a dirty bomb. As a result, here you have the Burevestnik developments. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.